Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about my must-draft early round wide receivers for fantasy football in 2021. Inside today's video, I'm going to go over the first 4 rounds of wide receiver average draft position, and then give you one wide receiver from each round that I believe to be a must-draft player based upon where they are going at their current average draft position. But before we get on into the video, I'd like to ask if you guys are new to the YouTube channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, to please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. Not only is it free, we put out content here basically every single day to help you guys win your 2021 Fantasy Football Championship. And whether you are new or not to the channel, please make sure that you hit that like button down below to help boost this video up the algorithm so that more beautiful people like yourself can see today's video. So let's get on into it. We begin in round number 1 right now in round 1 ADP. Wide receivers Davante Adams, Tyreek Hill, and Stefon Diggs go in that range. Obviously, in any league, things could go differently. Someone could take DeAndre Hopkins in the first round, but we are dealing with average draft position in this video. So Adams, Hill, and Diggs are the first round picks at the wide receiver position at their current ADP. So my pick of the must-own wide receiver, the must-draft wide receiver from that range is Davante Adams, ADP wide receiver number 1. Overall pick 7.7, up 6.49 slots on the week, obviously with that news of Davante Adams being reunited with Aaron Rodgers, because it isn't really even a reuniting, because he's still the quarterback there. We thought he was going to be the quarterback there, but then there was a lot of smoke, a lot of talk about him retiring, him going to do Jeopardy, him going to request a trade. So obviously with Davante Adams there with Aaron Rodgers, his chances of finishing as the wide receiver 1 are just so much higher when compared to it being Davante Adams and Jordan Love, because no digging against Jordan Love, but he's not Aaron fucking Rodgers. So that's really all we got to talk about there. Davante Adams last year in 14 games finished as the wide receiver number 1 in PPR, 1.5 PPR, and the wide receiver number 1 in standard, averaging 25.6 PPR points per game, 21.5 half PPR points per game, and 17.4 standard points per game. Meaning, from points per game perspective, Davante Adams was the wide receiver 1 in PPR, 1.5 PPR, and the wide receiver number 1 in standards. Last year, every single game Davante Adams was in, this guy was just a menace to your opponent that you were playing against in your matchup, because Davante Adams is basically matchup proof. You can put 2 corners on him and it does not matter at all, because Aaron Rodgers is going to force feed this man the ball whether he's open or not. You want to know why? Because even if he's not open, he's going to come down with the ball a majority of time. Last year, he had a 34.1% target share, meaning 34.1% of the time Aaron Rodgers threw the ball, over 1/3 of the time it went to Davante Adams, ranking number 1 at the wide receiver position. 42.2% of the time in the red zone, Aaron Rodgers threw the ball, it went to Davante Adams. Even with the additions of Randall Cobb coming back, even with them drafting Aaron Rodgers, even with the myriad of wide receivers that they have in Green Bay, no one can even touch Davante Adams' level. Now, in your league, Davante Adams may not even be the first wide receiver off the board. And a lot of the mocks I'm doing, it's Tyreek Hill or it's Stefon Diggs. So Davante Adams isn't always the number 1 overall wide receiver off the board. And if he comes off as wide receiver number 3, you are getting some insane value, because in my opinion, this Green Bay Packers team is going to show absolutely no signs of slowing down. They're probably going to go ahead and make the NFC Championship game to lose it yet again like they always do. But that's a-okay, because you don't get your fantasy points in the NFL playoffs. You get them during the regular season, and that's when Davante Adams, that's when Aaron Rodgers really tend to tear it up. So I am expecting big things out of Rodgers, and the numbers could honestly increase, especially if he plays in all 17 games on the season. Last year, in those 14 games, he had 149 targets, 10.6 per game, ranking 4th at the wide receiver position, 115 receptions, 8.2 per game, ranking number 2 at wide receiver for 1,374 receiving yards, 4th at wide receiver, and 18 total touchdowns. Number 1 at wide receiver. 18 total touchdowns. You would think with how many touchdowns Aaron Jones scores in this offense that Davante Adams would have like 5 touchdowns at the end of the season, but that's just not true. Even in the red zone, even when they're not in the red zone, the ball's just always going Davante Adams' way, so it's a pretty good bet that this guy's going to be scoring a ton of touchdowns yet again in 2021. Again, the thought process between dubbing Davante Adams as a must-draft wide receiver is because of his skill set and because of the quarterback. When you have a great quarterback, when you have a great wide receiver, typically very good things happen for fantasy football. So Davante Adams is my must draft round 1 wide receiver. But before we get on in to round number 2, I'd like to let you guys know that today's show is brought to you guys by our brand new podcast, Betting You. Who will win the Heisman? Can Georgia dethrone Alabama? Which MAC teams should you be putting your money on? These questions and more are answered every single Wednesday with Matt Gajowski and Ben Ross as they talk all things college football betting. We have episodes available now on nearly every single podcast platform, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So go ahead and check them out today. Now into the round 2 at the wide receiver position. In round 2, the wide receivers going in that range are Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins, DK Metcalf, AJ Brown, and Justin Jefferson. My must-draft wide receiver in that range is Calvin Ridley, ADP wide receiver number 2 off the board right now. Overall pick 13.5 up, plus 1.35 slots on the week. To me, there are those big 3 wide receivers that I discussed that are in the first round of ADP. Adams, Hill, and Diggs. Those are the big 3 that go in the first round basically every single time. But after that, there is obviously a huge cluster of wide receivers, and in my opinion, the one that's not in the top 3 that could finish as the number 1 overall wide receiver is Calvin Ridley, wide receiver of the Atlanta Falcons. With the exit of Julio Jones, the door has been left wide open for Calvin Ridley to potentially have that number 1 like season due to an immense amount of volume in a very pass-heavy offense in Atlanta. In 15 games last year, Calvin Ridley was the wide receiver 5 in PPR, 4.5 PPR, and the wide receiver number 4 in standard, averaging 18.8 PPR points per game, 15.8 half PPR points per game, and 12.8 standard points per game. Meaning, from a points per game perspective, Calvin Ridley was the wide receiver 4 in PPR, 4.5 PPR, and the wide receiver number 3 in standard. And mind you, this is not all just with Julio Jones gone, because Julio Jones was actually healthy for a lot of the season. It's not like he missed 16 games, 15 games, or 14 games, or something like that. He was there for a decent amount of the season, and Calvin Ridley was still able to put up big numbers, which to me just defeats the logic that some people use that Calvin Ridley can't have a amazing year because they drafted Kyle Pitts and he's going to somehow fill the Julio Jones role to perfection. To me, I think that's a little bit crazy, especially in his rookie year when rookie tight ends inside of fantasy football, rookie tight ends in the last decade, only one has finished as a top 5 tight end, and that was Evan Ingram all that many years ago. So it is very risky to draft a tight end like Kyle Pitts super early in fantasy, and it's really risky to assume he's going to have some type of monstrous season. So I think Calvin Ridley should be fine. He had 143 targets last year, 9.5 per game, ranking 7th at the wide receiver position for 90 receptions, 6.0 per game, ranking 11th, 1,374 receiving yards, 91.6 per game, ranking 4th at wide receiver for 9 total tugs, 9th at the wide receiver position. Even Robert Kraft would be excited for that amount of tugs. So I like Calvin Ridley a lot going into this season. Like I was saying earlier, this team is just so pass heavy. That defense in Atlanta is complete and utter dog shit, and that just gives you a higher chance to throw the ball late in the game. Matt Ryan has been throwing the ball at an absurd rate for a majority of his career at this point. They haven't had a good defense since they were on that Super Bowl run in which they choked to the New England Patriots. Calvin Ridley had a 25.1% target share in this offense for Atlanta, which is 13th highest at the wide receiver position, which just tells you how crazy it was that Davante Adams has a 34.1% target share in his offense. That's almost 10% more than Calvin Ridley, and Calvin Ridley was still number 13. That just shows you how much of a target hog Davante Adams is in Green Bay. This is not to discourage you from drafting Calvin Ridley because 25.1% is a very high number, 26.8% inside of the red zone. So Calvin Ridley is going to be used all over the field, and I believe that he is one of those wide receivers that also has game-breaking potential, because if you guys remember any games from Calvin Ridley in the past, this dude is a fucking speedster. Now, he doesn't run the craziest 40 time, a 4.43, which is 86th percentile according to Player Profiler, so he's not out there being Tyreek Hill or something, but he is relatively fast, and I believe that Calvin Ridley is one of those wide receivers that could get 200 yards and 3 touchdowns in a given game, especially when Atlanta has to throw the ball so much. Now into round number 3. Wide receivers going in this range are CeeDee Lamb, Keenan Allen, Terry McLaurin, Allen Robinson, and Amari Cooper. I love CeeDee Lamb, but he is not going to be my pick here because, to me, maybe we're really putting CeeDee Lamb near his ceiling. At wide receiver 10, if Amari Cooper is healthy, which is my belief, I think they're both going to be very good for fantasy. But my pick in this range is the wide receiver number 10 based upon current average draft position, Keenan Allen. Overall pick, 26.0 up plus 0.99 spots in the last week. Keenan Allen is on a team that I believe is going to take another step up after having a fucking-tastic 2020 NFL season. Basically, everything went right. The team was completely terrible with Tyrod Taylor. They could not move the ball at all. And then the doctor has an oopsie-whoopsie and accidentally stabs Tyrod Taylor's lung when giving him a shot, which sucks, obviously. That is a terrible scene. But it helped the team immensely because then Justin Herbert got under center. And once Justin Herbert got under center, this offense was just beautiful. It was crazy because, me included, everyone thought Justin Herbert was going to completely stink. I was laughing. I was like, haha, you're stuck with Justin Herbert now. But in reality, Justin Herbert won the Offensive Rookie of the Year. He was very, very good. And I expect him to build on that in 2021, especially with the fact that this offense should be a lot better since Anthony Lynn isn't the head coach, in my opinion. I think Anthony Lynn is a bit of a stooge, so I think this helps them out even more. And with a second year under center for Justin Herbert, he should be able to develop. And regardless of who was under center, even with Tyrod under center, you probably still would have been fine drafting Keenan Allen because Keenan Allen just sucks up those targets. In 14 games last year, Keenan Allen finished as the wide receiver 12 in PPR, 14.5 PPR, and the wide receiver number 18 in standard, averaging 17.5 PPR points per game, 13.9 half PPR points per game, and 10.4 standard points per game. Meaning, from points per game perspective, Keenan Allen was the wide receiver 6 in PPR, 11 in half PPR, and the wide receiver number 14 in standard. Having 147 total targets, 10.5 per game, ranking 5th at wide receiver for 100 receptions, 7.1 per game, ranking 5th at wide receiver, 992 receiving yards, 16th at wide receiver. It's crazy that he had 100 receptions and didn't even get over 1,000 receiving yards, but I expect that number to definitely go up if he gets a similar amount of targets, which I expect in 2021. He also had 8 total touchdowns on the year, ranking 13th at the wide receiver position with a 26.8% target share in the offense, ranking 5th at wide receiver with a 24.6% red zone target share. And again, he only played in 14 games and put up those big numbers. And the first game, while I said that he probably would have been fine with Tyrod Taylor, which I do actually believe, his game with Tyrod Taylor, he had 8 targets, just 4 receptions, and 37 receiving yards, which is terrible. But the next week, Justin Herbert took over and things started to really change. 7 receptions on 10 targets, 96 receiving yards, and he was wide receiver 20 on that week, and he continued to keep on building on that. I really do believe that Justin Herbert is a very talented quarterback, and I believe heavily in this team, and Keenan Allen, like I have been saying earlier on in the video, is just such a safe wide receiver year in and year out. So now with even better quarterback play, there's no reason not to draft him, in my opinion, as the must-draft wide receiver inside of the 3rd round. But before we break down I almost gave you guys a spoiler. Before we break down the 4th round at the ADP for the wide receiver position, I got to tell you guys something else. We have a brand new YouTube channel for sports betting. If you love what we do on the DFS channel and you love what we are doing right here on the Fantasy Football channel, then you guys are going to want to go ahead and subscribe to the Awesemo Odds channel. You can find the link to the Awesemo Odds channel in the description of this video. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button, turn the notification bell on, and enjoy all of that great content that we are going to be putting on there on the sports betting channel. If you want to check out some other free content, you can find our fantasy football rankings in front of the paywall on Awesemo.com on the fantasy football tab on top of the website. And for sports betting, you can go ahead and check out the Awesemo Odds tab for access to the Odds Shopper and our MLB betting tools, which include our sports betting model and our player prop tools. So make sure that you guys check that out. So in the round 4, the wide receivers going in that range are Robert Woods, Mike Evans, Tyler Lockett, Cooper Kupp, Julio Jones, DJ Moore, Jamar Chase, Higgins, Adam Thielen, and Brandon Ayuk. My pick in this range, if you guys have been watching this channel, me and Lofty talk about this guy ad nauseum. Julio Jones, wide receiver number 18 off the board, overall pick 38.7. Now, I understand that the Tennessee Titans are a run-heavy team, that Derrick Henry is going to put his nose into the ground, put his helmet down, and establish the run for this team. But you don't bring in Julio Jones if you just don't expect to use him. You wouldn't have traded for Julio Jones, not drafted Julio Jones. Julio Jones is ancient at this point, 32.5 years old, which is also an argument people will make. Just so you know, at 32.5 years old, he has shown zero signs of falling off. People bring up the injury past. If you look at the past, he's barely missing games. It was really just last year where he missed a bunch of games, only playing in 9 games last season. So to me, there's really no negative aspect of drafting Julio Jones. Sure, he's not technically the #1 target in Tennessee. Wink, wink, wink. He could be the wide receiver 1 in targets. He could easily beat out A.J. Brown, especially if Julio is able to stay healthy. Last year, his stats were not that good, obviously, because he only played in 9 games. Finishing as the wide receiver 52 in PPR, 53.5 PPR, and the wide receiver number 52 in standard, averaging 16.2 PPR points per game, 13.4 half PPR points per game, and 10.6 standard points per game. Meaning, from a points per game perspective, he was the wide receiver 14 in PPR, 13 half PPR, and the wide receiver number 12 in standard, with 68 targets, 7.6 per game, ranking 64th at wide receiver, 51 receptions, 5.7 per game, ranking 53rd. At wide receiver, 771 receiving yards, 85.7 per game, ranking 39th at wide receiver, and 3 total touchdowns. So obviously, those numbers are not going to enamor you. Those numbers are not going to make you want to get up in the morning and have a wet dream, or wake up in the middle of the night with a wet dream of you drafting Julio Jones. And I understand that. But if I know anything about Julio Jones, which I do, I've been alive for his whole career. I know I look like I'm fucking 12 years old, but I'm actually 10 years older than that. I am 22. People talk about that in the comment section all the time. Thank you to everyone who comments down below in these videos. I really appreciate it. I love you guys, even if you think I'm some type of an asshole or something, which are the comments sometimes, which make me laugh. So thank you guys for that as well. But Julio Jones, the reason why I'm so enamored with him here is that he's going as the wide receiver 18, falling into the 5th round in some drafts, which is just ludicrous, because you know who Julio Jones is. He's a perennial top 12, top 10, even a top 5 wide receiver. This change in offense should have 0 effect on him. Sure, maybe they're not throwing the ball his way as much as they would have in Atlanta, and I understand that, but it's going to be more efficient passes. You can't stop this offense. This offense is going to absolutely destroy defenses. How do you stop A.J. Brown, Julio Jones, and Derrick Henry? You stack the box, they throw the ball. You double Julio, you throw it to A.J. Brown. You double A.J. Brown, you throw it to Julio. What are you going to do? How are you going to stop this? I don't understand how it's even going to be possible. So I expect Julio Jones to put up humongous numbers and potentially finish as a top 10 wide receiver that you are getting closer to wide receiver 20 than you are to wide receiver 10. So let me know down below in the comment section what you guys think about these must draft early round wide receivers. I love you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure that you check out all the links in the description. Follow me on Twitter at NotoriousFNTSY and check out my articles on Awesemo.com. I post them every single day. I love you guys. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your guys' day. Make sure you hit that subscribe button as well. Have a great day. Happy weekend, baby. Good boy.